Hello and welcome to today's presentation. Today I'm going to try to walk you through a new approach which I refer to call it as a domain flipover, especially in scenarios if you are working on in any acquisitions, mergers, divestitures, and anything related to Active Directory domain consolidation. Now, this is a very interesting topic, and many of us who work in identity access management landscape, we might have come through these situations in our lifetime, and this is where this approach is going to make a difference. If you are working in any of these scenarios, or you are in a organization that helps or that works in these scenarios, then this video is definitely for you, and you may get the value of your time spent by engaging you in this conversation. With that, without any further ado, let's just actually dive into the solution and approach. And as I always do in my technical presentations, that I first try to make sure that we understand the challenge or the problem itself. Then I try to understand the magnitude of the challenge, and then we actually go and dive into a solution and its pros and cons, right? So that's exactly what I'm going to do in this presentation. Some of you who have been watching my videos, they know my way of presenting all these technical deep dive demos. So I intend to do the same. And not only we would be discussing and talking about this new approach, but I would also be showing you this whole solution in my lab as a not just talk to talk, but walk to talk scenario too. So that demo should help you answer your questions and make you feel comfortable with this approach. Hope that sounds promising. With that, let's look into what this solution is, what the challenges are, and then we'll go about the magnitude, right? So mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures are pretty common in our identity access management landscape, right? They are common, but they still, as all of us probably know, they're very complex, they're very costly, and they are very time intensive. That means you will see that that can span to many years, right? For the large Fortune 500 companies, this TSA can run up to 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? This is the length of this project, which is also quite bothersome because the longer you remain in this stage, the pain keeps growing, right? It's not easy to stay in that phase for 3, 4 years. So that is where the problem is. Now, the another important problem with these mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures, especially when we are talking about Active Directory consolidation and migration, is your end user experience, right? And that is a troublesome area that all of us experience. And not only that, every organization is worried about the business continuity because nobody, however we want to say it, no organization wants any business interruptions, right? So there is a huge potential of these projects that can actually impact the business continuity, and which is a major concern to the IT leaders, right? And that keeps them up in the night because they don't know what to expect when this migration actually happens, right? So that's a huge area of concern. And as I said earlier, these M&A and divestiture IT programs often spans multiple years, depending on the size of your organization and complexity of your organization, and it requires a significant coordination and precision. Another important thing that the required skills to do these AD consolidation is also very limited, right? So you don't have a large pool of resources that has got good experience of delivering it, and you will believe me once you if you're actually doing it, or if you are going to do it in the next few years or few months, you will realize what I'm saying. So it's a it becomes harder and difficult for organization to even conceive it. Now, before I go to the emerging challenges, I also want to make sure that we talk about one more scenario here, and maybe that your organization is not currently running under M&A or divestiture, but it has already gone through several M&A and divestiture. I have seen this happening for almost every Fortune 500 company, right? And guess what happened in most of these organizations? They accumulate. You can call them as a technical debt or whatever word you want to use it, but they actually accumulate multiple Active Directory as their potential IDPs. And having multiple Active Directory, their management, their application, their day-to-day IAM operations, their infrastructure, their management just becomes a nightmare. Not only it's an operational nightmare, not only it's a significant cost enhancement, but on top of it, which is what also worries all of our security personnel, including your CISO, is the security implication out of it, because your security blast radius has gone so big. And those are the real challenges. You may not be doing a M&A or divestiture today, but you might have already done that, and that is also a potential scenario where organizations have been planning to consolidate Active Directory, but they are not taking a move because they are scared of all these challenges that I just enumerated, right? So that's the real world scenario that many of us are familiar with. Now, another emerging challenges that or emerging challenge that you might know, that many organizations, I work with several Fortune 500 companies in this landscape, and I'm very fortunate to have helped many organizations with these kind of a project, whether it's a Fortune 500 company or large organization over 40, 50,000 user base. They are also planning to migrate from their on-prem Active Directory to cloud native Entra ID only, right? There are many organizations, either they have the project in the flight, or they are considering or planning, or they're already trying to do that, right? So this is another scenario, and when you get into that scenario, you again get into the challenges of the identity consolidation complexity. So that's another area that this solution might help you or your organization. And then when we talk about this domain flip over solution, is an innovative solution, right? That's the least I can say about it, because instead of running to multiple, the project spanning into multiple ES, which we talked about, you can actually get this done very quickly with a cutover weekend migration approach. Details are coming, right? So you will be seeing what he's talking about, right? When you say one side that it spans for years, and then secondly you say that you can accomplish it in one cutover weekend, that's really shocking in my viewpoint. And we will understand that when we go a little bit deeper into this slide, or the slide deck, as well as in our demo. Now, not only it is a cutover weekend migration approach, but what makes it more promising and more comforting is that it provides you a predictable set of results, which is the core concern of your IT leaders, which is what they are even not trying to do that, because they're scared of the outcome of this project, the complexity of the project, and they don't know what's going to break if you do these consolidation effort, right? So, but with this approach, you're almost guaranteed the set of results that you're going to get with this approach, right? And then obviously this cannot happen if you disrupt the users. So there is a minimal disruption of the users, and it is fast. And the best part that you see here, it reduces the overall project risk. Risk mitigation is the key to these kind of a project, and that's where domain flipover actually shines. Sounds interesting, team? Let's dive further. Let's try to see what is the magnitude of these kind of a projects. I'll give you some statistics here. I'm not going to read everything for you. This is for you to consume it, but it gives you the overall M&A activity in 2024, which is about 3.2 trillion with T, guys. And that is the scope. That's where the organizations are running through these M&A and divestiture M&A project. And I have given you statistics for divestitures down in the later half of this slide. And that's where we are talking about, right? These organizations are working. 80% of organizations anticipate 3 or more divestitures in the next 12 to 18 months, right? So IT services M&A 1,200 deals in 2024. This is just a quick presentation of the amount of work that this is required to be done and is being done as I speak to you. I'm going to leave this slide for you to go through, but let's just get into what is this benefit of this solution when we talk about domain flip over as an approach. The first thing that automatically comes to my mind is a seamless user experience, and many of these bullets that I have here actually relates to each other. That means the end user experience during this migration is flawless. They don't even feel that they have been migrated, which is what is the dream come true kind of a scenario. They don't see any changes to their desktop. They don't see any changes to their access to files, printers, application. It is so transparent that they don't even know that they have been migrated from the old environment to the new environment, or old Active Directory to the new Active Directory. Sounds interesting? Yes, it is interesting, right? And because this is possible, the seamless user experience is possible also, that relates to the predictable migration and a really low hanging fruit. So this is pretty quick that you can achieve it instead of waiting for, spanning to multiple years this project and going through this painful migration journey. So it's pretty quick, and then it is providing the predictable results because you know what exactly you're going to see, because you have already tested every possible scenario before you do the migration, whether that's an application access, whether there's a file server access, printer access, your cloud access. All of them have been already tested in your POC by your application testing team, and that means the surprise element in this migration, which is the most worrisome part to your IT leadership and to your business leadership as well, is taken care of. And again, it is again related to the seamless user experience, as I said earlier. Minimal disruption or risk, since it is providing you the predictable set of results, the disruption is almost negligible, and the risk is also negligible, which is the core blocking point for these projects that many organizations are not even attempting to move forward because they're so scared, though they know that it is a daunting task for their team to manage the security with multiple IDPs, to manage the infrastructure required for that, to, their IAM operations are so difficult to manage it, knowing fully well, because of the risk element attached to these kind of a project, they are not even willing to make a decision to simplify their identity access management landscape, right? That's where this minimal disruption and risk come into. Now, any solution without a rollback capability is not a solution in my view of my IT experience world, right? Now, here is a unique thing about this rollback capability here. And hopefully you don't need to roll back anything when you are actually cutting over, because you had already tested. The rollback in this scenario becomes important when we are running the POC with your application testers. And that's where this rollback becomes so simple and easy. If the application tester tells me that, hey, I'm not able to do XYZ activity on my machine, which I was able to do earlier, he or she only has to Control Alt Delete, log back to the old domain, and good to go. Nothing to be done. He can continue working for the rest of the time till we fix that application. So the rollback is just not a rollback, an easy rollback, but the rollback is also pretty simple, and it does not impact. And the best part of this rollback is that there is no data loss in rollback activity. So if a user was working with a new ID and he made certain changes and he said, okay, something is not working, I need to go back to my old ID. He goes back and he will see all the changes that he has made as a new ID, or vice versa. So that is more powerful rollback without any data loss. That makes it more promising. And obviously, when you see all these things, you would see that it reduces the overall complexity and cost as well as timeline of your project, which is a significant improvement. How we get there, you will see down the road, and you will see how does it reduces the complexity and the overall cost of your project. That is worth noticing. And obviously, the applications are the biggest area of concern, as I have been saying it since the beginning of this presentation, because especially the Active Directory integrated applications are the most troublesome, and they have like a vicious cycle, which I will explain in the next slide, that becomes a nightmare for organizations to handle in these kind of a Active Directory consolidation work. And we'll see how effectively this approach deals with them, so your Active Directory integrated applications are taken care of. And as I said in the beginning, any solution without security and compliance is not a solution, right? Rollback is important, and security and compliance is extremely important. Throughout this process, obviously, it enhances your organizational security posture and compliance by simplifying your identity access management landscape. Not only that, it also addresses the core principles of zero trust when we do that, right? So then not only it is minimizing the security blast radius, but on top of it, it is helping us to implement your zero trust principles, which you have been struggling to do for last, God knows since how long, right? So that's another advantage of this domain flip over solution. Now, I have tried to give you a scenario of a traditional or conventional migration approach versus a domain flip over approach. What is the difference in the process? What are the challenges that you see? And what are the advantages of doing the domain flip over migration approach? So the first thing is a design or redesign the new Active Directory. It could be a existing Active Directory, or you could decide to create a new greenfield Active Directory. That's why I have kept both the word design and redesign. The redesign or design is also important in the light of that how you're going to bring the objects from your source Active Directory. So until you plan it, until you plan your organizational units, you plan your GPUs around it, you plan the role-based access control, and you provide. Here is the opportunity that I mentioned earlier. Here is when you design or redesign your target Active Directory, right? Depending on what the case may be. If it is an existing Active Directory, you need to redesign it. If it is a brand new greenfield Active Directory, then you need to design it. But here is the opportunity for us to follow the zero trust fundamentals. So not only that it could have been much harder for you, but this project is an opportune moment for making sure that your Active Directory is following the zero trust principle, right? Now, the second activity is that you would deploy the migration tool, which could be a third-party tool. It could be even Microsoft Active Directory Migration ADMT tool. Most of the organization use either Quest or other Netrix project. I have used Quest Migrator for a long time, so I mentioned that, but it's not the tool, it's not the vendor, it's the tool that is gonna do the job for us, right? So that's the tool deployment. And once the tool is deployed, you sync the users and groups from Active Directory to the target Active Directory, which is generally is easier and simpler task, barring the complexity of some organization where you will have to, design and architect a little bit more carefully with several identities that needs to be merged. But once you design and plan and execute it, this is a relatively easier task. And guess what? When you're doing it to the target Active Directory, nobody is using the target Active Directory. So there is at this level, there is no impact to your existing users and ID, because they don't even know that new Active Directory exists while we are building this, syncing this at the same time. Now, as a part of migration activity, you need to re-ACL servers, and it is dependent. I try to explain you, or maybe not. So the re-ACL is especially important in an intra-forest Active Directory consolidation, because in intra-forest you cannot bring the SID history. In inter-forest, you may not have to restart the re-ACLing upfront, but you may have to do re-ACLing later, because SID history would help you, and that we can go in more technical details when we get into the demo. Then you need to do the migrate workstation, and then migrate servers and decommission the source Active Directory. Here is what the challenge is. The re-ACL is very time consuming, especially when I'm working for a customer right now that has 70 trillion files sitting in their NAS. Now, to go and modify every single file and add additional IDs from the target Active Directory is a lot of compute, lot of time, so it's very time consuming, right? and that has to happen no matter what solution you do some point of time. Now, the biggest problem and the bottleneck here is workstation migration. Now, most of the organizations that I happen to work have over 40,000 workstations, most of them, right? A majority of the organization that I had the opportunity to work have over 40,000 workstations. Now, generally, when you use these migration tools like Quest Migrator Pro or something else, you run this migration in batches, and you create a batch of 100 to 150, right, or 200, and that's what you do. Now, when you do this batch migration, it has to go through several processes in workstation migration. You need to install the agent, you need to do the discovery, you need to do kind of a reackling, and then once you reackle, then you do the migration, right? So there's a lot of activity that are required to do this workstation migration. So it takes time. It's very time consuming. And imagine if you have got 40,000 workstation and you're doing 300, 400 workstation a week, then you can calculate the lifespan of this workstation migration. That's a very long journey, right? Not only you need to migrate in these kind of a migration scenario, the real world experiences, you will see 10 to 15% failures, number one. Then you will also have to do the hypercare to your end users, which is another area to be looked into. And the rollback is generally very difficult. It's not that easy to roll back easily, right? It goes through several iteration, and many times it doesn't go cleanly. So there is a potential impact here in this workstation migration process, right? Now, because this workstation migration is going to span months or years depending on the size of your organization, it poses a very unique challenge for your Active Directory integrated application. And I'll try to paint the picture. So for an organization, if you have got, let's say, a 50 or 100 applications that are authenticating to your Active Directory, and you decide to migrate the first batch or first week, let's call it first week of your workstation migration, you migrate 400 workstations into the new Active Directory, your application is still back on the old Active Directory, it breaks for these 400 users that you migrated, right? Or it will have a different end user experience based on the application type. So that's a concern, right? So what's the other way around? The other way around is that, okay, I'm going to reconfigure that application or migrate that application into the target Active Directory. Then it starts working for these 400 users that we migrated in the week, but it breaks for the rest of the 40,000 users that are sitting back on the old Active Directory. So it becomes a daunting challenge how to handle it, because it is not possible for you to migrate 40,000 workstation in one single shot. You cannot just migrate 40,000 workstations together, and that puts you into a dicey situation how to deal with this Active Directory integrated application, right? And that's where this is a huge challenge. That is the one biggest blocker for Active Directory migration that stops you to do this migration. Rest of them probably is relatively easier to do, but Active Directory applications are the biggest blocker in conventional Active Directory consolidation and migration approach. Now, when you do that, and when you're doing this migration in this way, not all the users are logging on with a new ID. So if you are using Entra Connect or Entra ID as your cloud ID and you're using Entra Connect Sync, it also adds complexity for them to start using new IDs in the cloud. On the contrary, if you would have everybody in one shot, then it becomes easier for you. So it also adds complexity into Entra Connect Sync here, right? I hope it makes sense, team. Now, when we go the other side, the other approach, what's the key difference here? Look here, what we do here. We redesign the target Active Directory, design or redesign, depending on what the new target Active Directory is. We deploy the same migration tool, so the steps are the same. Sync users and groups stays the same. Here is the change. As soon as your users and groups are synced to the target Active Directory, which could happen very early in your project lifetime, depending on how complex your users merging is, right? Or how complex your existing technical debt is in your organization. So this is a low hanging fruit that can be accomplished pretty early compared to the long project spanning over multiple years. So it might happen in first few months, maybe first quarter, first 3 months, for 4 months, or maybe 6 months, depending on size. But it is still much rapid and faster to get your users synced, and they are continuously syncing. It's not a one-time sync, right? So the users and groups are syncing, their passwords are syncing from the source Active Directory to the target Active Directory. As soon as you're done, we are ready to configure our domain flip over solution. And what this domain flip over is actually flipping over the user profile. User profile is the same whether you log in with the new user account or whether you log in with the old user account. Very simple to deploy. It is done through the group policy. It is controlled via group policy. And one fine morning, we can get these people ready to the domain flip over. Here is the best part of this. Now, what happens with this domain flip over? Once we are ready, we have tested it for the test user, we can have a POC in production that runs with your application tester. So we have identified your all application testers in your organization as a part of the project management, and these application testers are required to test their application in a stipulated time, not an open window. And they say, hey, you can test this your application between Monday to Thursday or something like that. So they don't have an open window. And during that window, we flip their domain over. Basically, what happened is that their workstation remains where it is. We're not touching workstation. Their new user ID is already there as a part of our directory synchronization. We ask them to log in with their new ID to the existing workstation, and their profile change, so they don't see any changes in their desktop profile, their file access, their printer access, or anything. Everything stays the same, and they test their applications. And they can say, hey, out of 10 applications, 9 of them are working fine, and the 10 application is giving me trouble. That's where the rollback comes into, which I explained to you earlier. If that's the case, we identify that application, that's an LDAP application that needs to be fixed, and we ask the user to log back to the old domain, let him continue while we fix that application during the cutover weekend migration activity. And that is where, when these application testers are testing, they're testing application, they're testing everything on their workstation, including their desktop appearance, including their map drives, including folder redirection, including their internet browser setting, their caching. Everything is tested here. So now this is where you get the predictable set of results, right? Because you have tested everything during this phase, and then you can do the cutover. We can flip over of entire domain, or you could also stage it. You can do in phases depending on your organization need. It doesn't need to be entire domain. You can do in phases too. But technically, you can say everybody is now logging with the new ID without migrating workstation. So the whole span that we talked about, the pain and difficulty with workstation migration that spans over a year, is suddenly gone. Suddenly completely gone, right? You don't need to worry about workstation migration at this stage. Everybody on one fine decision point, one weekend, we are letting them log into the new domain. And since we have already tested everything, everything works as per the plan. All applications, the applications that were identified during the test POC are configured during this cutover weekend, so they are ready for the new domain. And as a result, when you cut it over, there is zero surprise. Basically, everything works as expected, and that's what is the seamless end user experience. Users don't even know that they have been migrated because their account, login account is the same, domain name is changed under the hood, so they don't even need to worry about that domain is changed. For them, they have to just type the same password. Passwords are also synced, so they don't see any changes. We reboot their machine, domain is all good, you'll see in the demo. And when they log in, they find everything working flawlessly, correct? And that's where the beauty is. And at some point, because you have to decommission the old domain, now you still need to migrate the workstation and servers. We can migrate the servers to our regular tool, which is still, because you need to do a re-ACLing there. But workstations, that 40,000 workstation that I was enumerating earlier, could be done in one single shot instead of running into batches, because that workstation is already working. So you just run a PowerShell, disjoin it from the old domain and join it to the new domain, voila. So your entire migration workstation is become simplified. Whatever server workload you have, you migrate them to the migration tool, and then you have finally migrated all your resources as well as users and groups to the target Active Directory, right? And that's where it eliminates the painful workstation migration as a part of advantage, right? That's why I mentioned we are providing the predictable weekend cutover. All issues are pre-validated in POC. Simplified interconnect, because when you do this interconnect, you don't have to do in batches and which users are migrated, which users are not migrated. It's a project management nightmare. Besides the technical nightmare, you could do it all in one shot. Do the hard match or whatever is required on the interconnect to make sure that the identities are now syncing from new Active Directory, not from the old Active Directory. So that process is simplified. Obviously, it has significantly reduced the effort because you're not migrating those 40,000 workstation in timeline and cost. And needless to mention, it has improved the security posture because first of all, when we redesigned the Active Directory, we followed the zero trust principle. Second is now you have reduced the number of IDPs and Active Directories in your environment. That means you are reducing the security blast radius. How does that sound? I hope it makes sense, all right? And that's the beauty of this domain flipover solution. And when you see it, you would believe it, right? That's the whole point. Seeing is believing, and I always believe that. With that, I can take you over to another video that is going to be a domain flipover demo, which is where we'll walk you through. I kept them as two separate videos because the one video will become too long. I hope it interests you, and if it interests you and you really want to see it in action, then be my guest and join my second part of this presentation, which is the demo part. I will put a link in the description too. So in case you try to do it next time, you don't have to go through the entire presentation, and you can click the link to go to the demo part of domain flipover. I hope it makes sense, team, and I hope it simplifies your Active Directory consolidation work. It helps you and your organization to be more productive, more predictable, and reduces your pain point. Obviously, it will reduce the cost and timeline for sure, and I hope it works for you. And I am happy to answer any questions if you have. Please ping me, please send me your notes. I'm happy to answer any question. Thank you all for your valuable time, and I will see you on the other side in my live technical demo of Domain Flipover. Thank you. Have a great day or a great evening, whichever part of the world you are watching this video. Thank you. Bye-bye.